Sleep can often feel like an unsolvable puzzle. We follow the latest guidance to keep the room cool, dark, and quiet. We modify our caffeine and food intake schedules, integrate a variety of breathing strategies, move our phones and TVs out of the room, and even block all of the blue light today's world has to offer. And we still often struggle to get a good night's sleep. Today, we have another evidence-based tool to add to your sleep quality toolbox here on the Catalyst 360 podcast, your trusted resource for engaging evidence-based health, wellness, and performance insights. Professor Dana McMakin is joining us to discuss why the concept of savoring might be the missing link between you and a rejuvenating sleep. I'm your host, Dr. Brad Cooper of Catalyst Coaching 360, and the work of our guest was recently featured in the Wall Street Journal alongside the work of another Catalyst 360 guest, Dr. Sarah Menting. Professor McMakin's emphasis is on clinical science and cognitive neuroscience in the Department of Psychology at Florida International University, and she holds dual appointments at the Brain Institute in the Department of Neurology at Nicholas Children's Hospital. She also directs a research group helping guide interventions for adolescents with problems related to controlling emotions and behavior, things like suicide, depression, and anxiety. I think you're going to find this one very, very interesting. If you're a health and wellness coach who has not yet registered for the Rocky Mountain Coaching Retreat and Symposium in Estes Park this September, right as the aspen leaves are changing, please don't wait. It is absolutely the event of the year for coaches, and space is limited, both housing and registration. All the details for both are under the Retreat tab at catalystcoachinginstitute.com. There is a 6-month no-interest payment option if that's helpful, as well as a group discount if you're coming with peers or team members. Please, if you have any questions, feel free to email us results@catalystcoaching360.com. And if you're an employer, EAP, or wellness service provider looking to integrate best-in-class, nationally board-certified coaching into your program or your platform, Catalyst Coaching 360 might just be what you're looking for. The ease of integration, value-based pricing, and 17-year history of providing the best in employee health and wellness coaching makes Catalyst Coaching 360 the choice for so many around the country. Please reach out to us anytime. Results@catalystcoaching360.com. That's results@catalystcoaching360.com, or head over to the website, catalystcoaching360.com. Now it's time to savor a few minutes with Professor Dana McMakin and the impact that savoring can have on our sleep and so much more on the latest episode of the Catalyst 360 podcast. All right, Professor, I am excited about this. You got the big feature in the Wall Street Journal. We're going to talk about savoring and a lot of your other work today, too. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Your research itself is fascinating, and I'm looking forward to digging into that. But question for you first. We had Dr. Kelly McGonigal on a long time ago, early on in the Catalyst 360 podcast, and she joked about research often being me-search. Did your personal story outside of academia influence some of your work, especially the sleep stuff, since we're going to start with that piece?
That is such a great question. I actually had a massive bout of insomnia when I was in college. And so, I became really intimately familiar with what it's like to lay in bed unable to sleep and how frustrating that can be, how much of an impact it can have on your daily life, and also how much you can move through it, right? Sort of acclimate to the experience of being sleep deprived. Turned out for me, it was entirely an iron deficiency that had led to anemia and led to insomnia, and it was a pretty easy fix. But nevertheless, that experience certainly had an impact, and it's something I think about even today.
Okay, so let's start with that rabbit trail. What led to the iron deficiency? Our son had a similar situation, not with his sleep, but he was in med school, and his running was not the way he was used to it being. He was putting in the miles, but just tired. So he discovered he had celiac as a result of that, and that was causing the iron deficiency. Without digging into PHI here with us, was there any tips? Because I'm guessing that's more common than people realize.
I think it is. So I'll disclose immediately. I'm not a physician, so this obviously is not any kind of medical advice or even review. But I think I probably had some form of iron difficulty for many years, but just wasn't aware. And then when I moved to Colorado at higher altitude, I guess that can magnify the issue. And I too, I was active in triathlons. I love to run and swim and hike. And when it got to its worst, I remember struggling so much to keep up with my friends when we were heading up a mountain. We were climbing a 14er, and that was my sign. I'm like, something is off because everybody else is moving through this okay. and was able to get some testing and find that, my body was not storing iron very well.
Interesting. Great reminder. Not our topic today, everybody, but good reminder. Get that blood work done. Find out where you're at. All right.
Well, so it is actually relevant. So I will say, right. So whenever I think you're struggling with sleep, it is a good thing to see a physician as well and just keep up with your well checks and make sure everything's in order, because so many different things can mess with your sleep.
Yes, there are so many variables that we're playing with here. And our audience knows you are about our 7th sleep expert. People love our sleep experts. You're some of our most popular guests. And you all come at it from a little different angle, as people are going to discover today with your interview. But it's just a tough area. So we found your work as a result of the article around savoring a happy memory to enhance our sleep. I read that in the Wall Street Journal and I went, what? Because I struggle. I'll be the first to admit a lot of these guest invites are very selfish on my part. You got my attention. Can you explain a little bit more about the concept, how it's applied, what you've seen in your research, and we'll keep digging into this more and more as we go.
Absolutely. I work really at the interface of sleep and mental health. And specifically, I'm focused on adolescent mental health and anxiety and depression. And in young, anxious people, we see that they have difficulty sleeping. About 90% of kids who have anxiety, and by kids, I'm going to say early adolescents, age 10 to 13, our data and the data of others show about 90% of those kids will report sleep problems.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Highly comorbid. And so a lot of my work is trying to understand, well, why and how do these things go together? And then the other piece that I'll mention right from the outset here is that problems with sleep in early adolescence predict later problems with depression, substance use, suicidal behavior. And those same outcomes are also related to having anxiety in early adolescence. So I became very interested in this interplay between anxiety and sleep and how they may lead to later escalation of mental health issues in later adolescence. So that's how I came to the topic initially.
Yeah, interesting. That's incredibly high numbers. Keep going. I don't want to interrupt you. You're on a roll here. Keep going.
Yeah. One of the things when you start talking to young people with anxiety that may not surprise many of us is that a lot of their difficulties with sleep are really centered around trouble falling asleep or trouble staying asleep. And so what we know is that in order to fall asleep, your body has to be willing to go unconscious, right? Your brain has to kind of let go of vigilance and looking out for threat in order to be able to fall into that slumber. And if you are someone who is kind of anxious and looking out for threatening things in your environment, historically we may have thought of that as being looking out for that predator. You don't want to fall asleep if there's a predator nearby. But in modern times, maybe that looks more like worrying about that test tomorrow or that friend that made you feel bad. It can be, as the body experienced similarly in terms of threat. And so that appears to really get in the way of being able to relax and fall asleep.
And so then that leads to what can we do about it? And that's kind of where the savoring concept came from. Was this one of 6 or 8 things that you were fiddling with in your research where you said, okay, let's run this versus this versus this? Can you talk us through that process?
Yeah, absolutely. There are standard interventions for sleep that are frequently used with people with insomnia or other stress-related disorders that primarily were really developed with adults. And they focus, as you've probably heard on your podcast before, on trying to normalize your sleep schedule, use light and dark cues to really bring your body down and kind of entrain circadian systems. They focus on increasing homeostatic drive, so increasing your physical activity and the activity you engage in while you're awake to sort of promote sleepiness, avoiding naps, things like that. So there are many things that we do in sleep intervention already that we also have tried with young people with anxiety, and they also seem to be a good fit. But what was missing was this pre-sleep kind of vigilant, aroused state, and how do you bring that down? And in traditional kind of cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, the focus is often on kind of countering those negative thoughts, or, maybe your negative thoughts are about, oh no, if I don't sleep, everything's going to fall apart tomorrow. So you sort of run these experiments on, well, do things really fall apart tomorrow, right? So there's lots of great content there. But what we found was kind of missing was this focus on just your emotional affective state, and how really modifying that can be done through thinking differently. But maybe for some people, just really targeting the emotion itself could be helpful. So for our anxious kids who get into this very aroused, vigilant state, how can we get them into a more relaxed state? There are, in some protocols, deep breathing exercises you can do. But what we find with what I have found, I'm going to speak for myself, what I have found with young anxious people is getting into this sort of quiet, stop thinking, relax, do deep breathing state can be very difficult for them, because kind of letting go is one of the challenges of anxiety. Barb Fredrickson, I'm going to go on a tangent here, but Barb Fredrickson, if you don't know her work, it's worth looking her up at some point, but did some really seminal work. And I forget when she started this work, probably in the late 90s, early 2000s, on what is the function of positive emotion. And just did these beautiful experimental designs and multi-method work showing that when you activate positive emotion, it is not just to feel good. It's not just this sort of extra thing that we get to experience as humans. It's actually really functional. And so she has two theories that have had a lot of support through the data. And one of them is called the undoing hypothesis. So the idea that when we activate positive emotions and feelings, it actually undoes some of our physiological arousal. And she's shown that in cardiovascular arousal and other arousal systems. And so I became very interested in this idea that, well, if we want to counter negative affect and vigilance, perhaps one way to do it is by activating positive emotions that through this physiology should actually unwind some of that vigilance and help you to fall asleep. And so that's sort of theoretically where we were coming from. And for adolescents, the idea of having them think about a great moment in their day or a great moment in their week seemed more interesting than having them quiet their mind and do deep breathing. And in fact, that's what we've found in our anecdotal clinical experience, is that a lot of youth really gravitate towards this strategy as an alternative to just kind of quieting the mind or deep breathing. And if you talk to lots of people who sleep well, or even any number of people, adults and otherwise, it is amazing how often versions of this savoring come up where people are like, oh yeah, I've been doing that my whole life. And I think in that Wall Street Journal article, the author presents one of those situations of someone who had done that in his life and didn't think about it.
So do you... That
was a lot. Sorry.
No. You gave us, that's what we want. So do you want to restrict the choice of those great moments? Because we also don't want to get arousal. So maybe one kid's like, oh, it was the best basketball game I've played, and I can remember hitting that last shot. And, at 13 years old, that was such a great day. But is that arousal? And so you're like, well, that's a cool memory, but let's think more about, or do you just, whatever comes to mind, you go with that?
I love that question because it's so logical, right? That having arousal, even through a positive experience, might be problematic and counter. I don't know the answer to that, because in my anecdotal clinical experience, I've yet to have a kid where I create a problem by having them focus on something positive. Okay. I have wondered the same thing as you. My mind has gone there, but I haven't felt the need to restrict the protocol yet, because it just no one's gotten there. So I've had kids imagine mountain biking, and, to me, it's whatever will engage their mind somewhere other than the things that are worrying them and upsetting them. And if that requires a highly arousing positive experience, well, maybe we go there, because at least it gets them unhooked from this channel, I'll call it, that's bringing them down and making it difficult to unwind. But, truth be told, we need more data on that question. And I think it's a really interesting question.
And I'm wondering, age 10 to 13 is the focus group that you're studying. Is social media the thing with this? Is it a way to get off of, oh, I wonder what they're saying about me on this, or I wonder what Sally did with this, or Joe did with it, or are they different questions?
They're definitely related. Because the thing that's going to cause the most vigilance and threat in a young adolescent is social threat. And when you are on social media, and this is my impression, I don't know that this is based on data per se, but you're playing Russian roulette of social threat, right? So you're cruising
100%.
through that Instagram or TikTok, and you're finding things you really connect with that feel good, that feel supportive. That's what keeps you there. And then all of a sudden you hit that threat. Yeah. And so I think there's a bit of a Russian roulette of social threat at bedtime that can happen on social media that is really that could be really damaging. But we're actually writing a grant on this topic right now. So I think there's a lot of questions to be asked more experimentally about exactly how that works and what to do, because I'm not someone who will come on and say social media is all bad and phones are all bad and we need to remove all of it and get rid of it, because I don't think that that's the case, nor do I think it's realistic. I think there are a lot of benefits to aspects of social media and phones and digital technology that we need to harness. And that's something we're really interested in.
Yeah, no doubt. So we want to keep this with the adults as well. A lot of parents listening to this, but also for the folks that are thinking, well, what about my situation? Tips around setting the scene. And this is not directly tied into your research from my understanding. Correct me if I'm wrong, feel free. But one of the things I've been playing with is turning on a playlist of very relaxing music the last 15 minutes, because doggone, the last 15 minutes before bed, I want to check that Nuggets game score. I want to see how my CSU Rams are doing. I want to, and so I get pulled into and then I'm like, oh, and it's only halftime. I'm going to finish till midnight tonight. Maybe I should wake up. And so the music is a reminder, Brad, you're done. Like, you're not checking scores anymore. It's now on. Are there things like that you've encouraged or you found just along the way seem to be helpful, even if they're not directly a part of your research?
Absolutely. And so we always do the savoring work within the context of a broader sleep intervention that has some of the elements you're talking about. But let me hone in on one element of it. So let's broaden from savoring and just talk about wind down routine in general, which is a part of many sleep interventions.
Yes.
We can talk about that, and then I'll pause, and maybe then we can talk about how the savoring looks exactly within that context. Does that sound good?
That is perfect.
All right. So wind down routine really should start about an hour before bed in an ideal situation. One of the challenges with teenagers is how much they have going on late into the evening hours. So sometimes there's some problem solving around that and prioritizing your health, right? But let's say we get that hour, 30 minutes minimum, and that we call our wind down routine. During that time, you really want to set the environment to optimize sleep, or sleepiness, I should say. And that's going to involve dimming the lights. In my own house, my husband has programmed our lights. He also studies sleep. He's
oh, no.
Yeah. So he actually has our lights programmed to dim an hour before bed. They do it automatically. They also go off when my kids are supposed to be napping. It's really wild. But anyway, you can set lights manually or automatically, right, to go more dim in the evening. And that's going to set the stage for melatonin to be able to be released, which helps with feeling sleepy. The other part of wind down routine is trying to remove the stimulating things that we do. And I think for young people and for anxious people who have anxiety, a lot of that stimulation is around conflict, or like we're talking about social media and that social threat roulette that we play. Talking with friends can be also, similarly emotionally intense. So it's about removing some of those overstimulating activities. Same thing with watching a violent or scary movie right at bedtime is also going to, activate. So I think of it as what I call like affective tone or emotional tone for that hour before bed. You want to make that as pleasant as possible. I know a lot of families with kids will sort of say, oh, we always talk about their worst part of their day and the best part of their day right at bedtime. It's not terrible. And if it works for your family, that's great. But, there is some wisdom could you talk about the hard part of the day earlier and then reserve that last half hour or hour for really just focusing on pleasant conversation and positive topics and things that bring feelings of, more than anything, feelings of safety and comfort. If you think about what we do with young babies, everything's around creating safety and comfort for babies. We sing, we read stories, we create a structured routine around bedtime. As we get older, those structures from our parents sort of disappear, and you're all of a sudden left alone trying to come up with what your own soothing routine can be. And we all know as humans, we don't always go down the right track with that. Right. So that's the wind down routine. So setting the lights more dimly, really focusing on the emotional tone and bringing safety and comfort to your environment. So that also would mean for kids, doing homework earlier in the evening, not doing homework right up until you're falling asleep, things like that, and coming up with a routine. So that's the wind down part of it. Ideally, that wind down is not happening in your bed and in your bedroom, because if you have trouble with sleep, because the more you can reserve your bed and bedroom for just sleeping, the better. There's some logistical constraints to that sometimes, so you work within what you can do. But I'll even suggest to kids who have trouble with sleep, they don't want to leave their room for X, Y, or Z reasons. That's fine. But then set up like a little, beanbag chair in the corner, or a spot that's cozy and comfortable, but not your bed, for that wind down period.
And even like for college students, maybe if your bed is the only spot you can study, maybe flip to your head on the other side of the bed or things like that. Is that the type of thing you're talking about? Okay. Yeah.
I love that idea. Anything you can do, to create a little bit of novelty, because what you want is for sleep to be associated with that place and spot, because that will help the idea is that helps bring sleepiness.
Very good. Okay. Very good.
Yeah.
So how does this differ from the gratefulness journal that's garnered a lot of attention in the last 5-6 years? It feels like it, but it's like a focused version of that in some ways. Am I reading that right? Or what would be some of the differences?
Well, I think so. Gratitude journaling, I think, has a lot of overlap here. And I think for the wind down routine, I will often recommend to kids to do something like gratitude journaling, or journaling about their favorite moment of the day, some kind of written form of savoring, or even drawing or taking photographs, anything that can kind of bring you into that place of positive emotion. Mm-hmm. And if gratitude is a specific type of emotion that gets your attention and feels good to you, then that's an absolutely great place to go. And I think a gratitude journal can support that kind of generation of emotion. But once you get into bed is when the savoring part really starts. And I can talk about that.
Yeah, give it to us, because, well, I won't give away my next question, but I tried it and I'm not getting it. So I'm missing something. So walk us through this.
Well, first of all, it's a difficult skill to hone. And one of the reasons we work with these young adolescents is because the young adolescent brain is incredibly plastic and capable of really trying these kinds of new mental things. And I think that's part of our interest in that age group, because as we get older, it gets harder to reset tracks, right? So it is difficult. So if you're struggling with it, it's okay. It might just mean a little more practice. And
all right, I'm in. Let's do this. So how do we do this thing?
Okay. So there's lots of ways to do it. And I think it's really about getting at the fundamental concept of getting yourself into a more happy, pleasant, or happy, or content, or safe space. And people can do that in all sorts of different ways, but I'll give you an example of one of the ways that we do it. So we will have kids imagine. So first of all, during the day, in a therapy session, but you could imagine doing this through writing or other activities on your own, we have people try to remember something positive that brought them positive feelings in the past week or so. We focused on the last week because if you go much further back, then you can get this contrast effect of like, oh, remember when life was so great. So we actually try to avoid going to your best moment in life and more stick to what are the daily things that bring you some kind of pleasure. And that can be like sitting on your front porch in the warm sunshine, having a cold glass of lemonade. It can really be that simple. Okay. Or connecting with someone in an intimate way, deeply, right, around something emotional, or feeling supported by your parent, or whatever the thing is for you that brings you that feeling of safety, contentment, joy, whatever. Any of those positive emotions are great, gratitude. But trying to come up with one where you had a real emotional connection or experience. And then once you identify that topic, then we'll have the kids, okay, now close your eyes. And I want you to try to get back to that space emotionally, right? Through your senses. What did it smell like? What did it feel like? What did you hear? What did you see? And try to get back into a place of reactivating those feelings. And we do a little routine where I'll have kids kind of rate how they're feeling. And then I have them, okay, now go ahead and get back to that place where you were with your brother having such a great time. Okay. And I'll keep them there for about 45 seconds to a minute. And then I'll pause and say, now, how are you feeling? And almost every time their mood has improved. So that's step one, is just showing that like you actually have some control over how you feel in any, in any given moment. which is often a surprise to kids. They don't realize that your emotions don't just happen to you, that you actually you have some agency in where your mind goes and how that makes you feel. And so the goal is not to like veridically remember whatever happened. It's actually just to like get back to that emotional space and reactivate those feelings.
That's helpful because I think, so you're saying it's not just a memory, it's reliving it. Like the savoring is such a cool word. That's a great word choice, by the way. But you're soaking it in. You're feeling it again.
Yes.
Okay.
And if anyone's interested in the topic of savoring, Fred Bryant wrote the original book on this topic, and it's brilliant. And it talks about anticipatory savoring. So the savoring we do, for example, looking forward to a vacation and all the ways we're going to enjoy it. The in the moment savoring. So savoring whatever's happening to you in this moment. Maybe you're having an awe-inspiring moment and you have this moment of reflection of recognizing how amazing it is, how lucky you are, et cetera, et cetera. And then reminiscent savoring, which is where you're really reflecting on past experiences and embellishing them sometimes even, right? It doesn't even have to be factual. And so I would say for the majority of this exercise, we're really more in that reminiscent savoring phase. Although if you go anticipatory and you want to bring your mind to thinking about something pleasant in the future, that's fine too. Okay. We don't have hard rules about that.
Okay.
But usually it ends up being reminiscent. And yeah, you're reactivating the feelings and sensations. And so then we have kids. Okay, so now you've gotten into that space. Now we're going to get into the part, it's savoring and switching. So we're going to get into the switching part. So now I want you to think of the thing that's been really upsetting to you lately, or has been on your mind, or you can't stop thinking about that worries you.
So bring it back. Even if I'm in this place, I'm like, okay, we're new grandparents, so that's mine. Holding Maisie, it's like this coolest thing in the world. And so you're saying, so go there, what you feel, hear, see, et cetera, and then go back to what you're ruminating about?
Well, so I should be very clear. This is our daytime practice, not our nighttime practice.
Thank you. Okay, very good.
Yes. And the reason we're doing this is because of maybe one of the challenges you've had is when you get to bedtime and you start trying to savor, it's so hard to stay there because your mind is cluttered with all these worries from throughout your day.
Sure.
So during the day, what we do is practice the switching part of this. How do you train your brain to move off that stuff you're worried about and into this more pleasant space? So we'll actually have kids, that now get back to that time that's been worrying you. And then we literally practice going back and forth. I'm going to leave you there for 30 seconds. Then I'm going to cue you. You're going to come back to your savoring memory and back and forth and back and forth. And we'll practice that probably 5 or 6 times back and forth.
About 30 seconds, a minute? Or is there
I actually do half the time for the ruminating worry and double the time for the savoring, offset things a little bit.
Okay.
But yeah, that's the idea. And that's designed to kind of bring you some of that mental flexibility and fortitude. And then the idea is as you get closer to bedtime, you enter your wind down routine. And now that worry channel, we used to call it a channel back when we started this work when televisions were a thing. But now we say YouTube channel. You can name it whatever you want. So you've got your like savoring YouTube channel, which you can call whatever you want. And you've got your kind of dark side. Some kids will call it dark side channel with worries and ruminations. And this is really critical because we are never going to tell kids that you should never go to your dark side channel because that channel is really important. It has lots of important information for you to pay attention to learn from, and to use to navigate your life. Our worries are really important. But it's not particularly helpful at bedtime because this is when we need to let our body turn off and get rest and restoration. And so by creating these sort of 2 separate channels, it acknowledges the importance of both, but the desire to sort of switch the channel to the savoring channel at bedtime because the utility of being on that worry channel is low at bedtime.
Got it. So during the day, you're setting it up. You're doing it 2-3 times during the day, once consistently. What's kind of once you're past the first couple of weeks of this, what is the routine that you suggest?
The hope is that once you're past a few weeks of this, you don't really need to do it that consciously anymore, right? But I do think in all anxiety treatments, and I think for people in general, it's important to save time to worry about stuff or to think about things that are upsetting to you. And some people just never do. So they get to bedtime and it all comes out. So I think if you're someone who doesn't tend to think about things that worry you or upset you or concern you, then it might be worth setting a reminder in your phone to like, hey, on the commute home or wherever, that spend some time thinking about these things that are important. But by building this mental flexibility to then switch to savoring, even during the day, you could then switch out of it, right, is the idea, right?
Okay, good. I want to talk through some of your other works. It's so fascinating. But before we take that left turn, any other tips that maybe we haven't touched on the sleep side that not the basics, the temperature, the sight, to get your dog out of your bed, turn off the TV, that kind of stuff. But maybe a few that you're like, well, a lot of people don't realize X. Why?
I mean, the only thing I would say is once you make that transition from wind down routine to your bed and you turn on that savoring channel, for some people, it can be difficult to kind of get into that space. And so we'll have them put photographs or anything that would remind you of your savoring episodes, like on your nightstand or nearby. Create just a really pleasant set of reminders nearby. So if yours is of Macy, right, maybe you have a photograph there that reminds you of some of those good moments that you can, that will help activate that part of your memory.
Okay. That's awesome. All right. You are doing tons of valuable work with youth. You've talked about a little bit, interaction between sleep, anxiety, emotions. Give us a little more. You set the scene, age 10 to 13, the impact of sleep, the fascinating about what you said about the anxiety and depression at that age is it tends to show itself later when it's there. Talk to us more about this. I think it's such a key topic, especially right now.
Yeah. So the idea that kids become depressed later, you mean? That there's a trajectory of this?
Exactly. Or adults that are struggling with it, maybe we can help them as parents, as teachers, as coaches, et cetera, if we can help them in that younger phase. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a perfect storm that happens when kids start approaching this adolescent period. And we think of adolescence as being like 13 to 17, right? Because it's teenage. The reality is that puberty starts quite early and increasingly earlier in our society. So the reason I study 10 to 13 is because, believe it or not, a lot of kids have already started puberty, pubertal maturation by the age of 9 or 10. Girls are a little bit ahead of boys by about a year or two. But that is when we see a lot of activation and changes biologically. Those interact, and it becomes a really dynamic world to these kids around that age and moving up into later adolescence. I think, as we've seen, some of the pandemic certainly exacerbated some of this for young people, but they're navigating, individuating from parents and family. And that doesn't mean forgetting about parents and family. Parents and family are still critical to adolescent development all the way through. So if you are a parent listening, don't worry. You still have a lot of value and importance in your child's life. It's just going to look different. And you may not get as much direct feedback about it, and appreciation about it from your young adolescent. But that's all pretty normal. But they still rely on you and look to you, and you have a big impact on your child's development. So hang in there. Is one thing. And they are also trying to figure out how to fit into this social world that's very complex. And where do they stand in the social hierarchy that is part of adolescent development? It requires a lot of regulating your emotions, managing all of the inputs that you're getting of social information, and all the while trying to do well in school and accomplish this or that to be able to take the next steps in your life, which at the time of adolescence is so fuzzy. You don't know where you're going or what's happening next, but you're expected to perform. Many kids involved in music or athletics, and all these things are wonderful and enriching and also come with a very complex social milieu.
Right.
And then when you add sleep to that, and maybe you've heard about this from some of your other guests, but there is an environmental aspect. So there's a biological aspect to sleep in adolescence, where adolescents start a circadian shift that leads them to want to stay up slightly later at night and sleep in later in the morning. And unfortunately, that circadian shift completely is opposite to the direction of our school start time. So as you get later and later in adolescence, your school start time is getting earlier and earlier on average in the United States. And that creates what we call a school sleep squeeze, where you get out of school, you're doing your homework and your athletics and whatever, and you get home from school. And not only do you have a lot to accomplish before you get to wind down because you've got homework and other things, but you also biologically are just not wired to want to fall asleep super early. And yet adolescents need on average about 9.5 hours, nine, sometimes 8, but usually more like 8.5 to 9.5 hours to really be functioning optimally. They are not yet adults who are more 7 to 8 hours. And that amount of sleep is really critical, we think, for brain development and managing emotion. So yeah, it's a sort of a perfect storm. So you've got this, if you've got kids who enter adolescence already with a little bit of anxiety, and now you add this, now you have to fit in and you have to, figure out where you are in the social hierarchy, and you have to perform well in school. All of these things can trigger anxiety. And then on top of that, we're shortening your sleep period, which we know has all sorts of detrimental effects on emotion and cognition and learning. And so it can really lead to a spin out for some kids, and depression and suicidality and substance use are some of the outcomes of that spin out.
Wow. Your work on what's called Remedy, REMEDY, research exploring motivational and emotional development in youth, is by definition, obviously youth, and we've been focusing a little bit of time on that. Any application of the things you're finding there outside of what we've already discussed in the adult population?
I really don't.
Anxiety and depression is such an issue. I mean, we coach people around the country with our parent company, and emotional and mental health is such a big area that they're bringing to their coaches. So anything along those lines that you think might be, even if it's not direct to your research, might be helpful to those folks that are working through that right now?
I mean, not to overstate the obvious, but sleep is the thing. I mean, so we're talking about the school sleep squeeze and how that's challenging for young people. But the reality is that sleep is a challenge in general in our society. And there have been, I think, many decades of, the less you sleep, the stronger you are, or just move through it and be,
I'll sleep when I'm dead.
Yeah. I'll sleep when I'm dead. Exactly. And I think the science is really starting to wake us up to the fact that is just not a good solution for most people. There are some exceptions, but for most people, it's not a good solution. We know from data that compromised sleep, whether that's not enough sleep or poor sleep quality. So I'll call out alcohol here as being a big challenge to sleep, because it messes with your REM sleep. It messes. So you think you're sleeping the right amount, but you are, but your sleep physiology has shifted. So you're not getting the same functional benefits of your sleep. And it's hard to even realize that connection, because alcohol will help you fall asleep because it's a sedative, but then it can really mess with your sleep physiology. And I'm just using alcohol as one example, but I think many adults and kids, we use different coping strategies to help us turn off the brain and fall asleep, and or we don't sleep, or we avoid sleep, or we just keep working. And that spiral can really set off mental health challenges. So we know from research that not getting enough sleep or getting poor quality sleep can impact your next day mood and behavior or learning. But we also know that over years long periods of time, that having a pattern of poor sleep can precede the onset of major depressive disorder, suicidal thinking and behaviors. And so we just know that it's a catalyst, that, not to use the term, but
we didn't pay her for that, folks.
And I'm probably not using it correctly, because you offered me that great definition before we started talking. It doesn't sound quite right. But the idea being, that it can really set off these cascades and make everything really more challenging. And I would think of sleep as one of the 3 pillars of health, right? We've got nutrition. We all know that we should focus on our nutrition. Exercise, we all get that feedback all the time. But I think it's only more recently that we're really thinking about sleep as that 3rd pillar of health. And so many people who struggle, they're looking for that immediate fix, that medication, that pill, that quick fix. There's all sorts of, sleep gadgets and things out there. And the reality is if we just focus on those 3 pillars of health, improve our physical activity, improve our nutrition, and improve our sleep, probably many of the things that we all ail from, you'd at least take the edge off of them, and be able to improve your long-term health. Yeah. So that is the recommendation, is to really focus on that.
Well, and no doubt. And you've tapped into something we talk about over and over and over. We call them the 4 catalyst cornerstones, and it's move, fuel, rest, and connect. So your 3 are 3 of those 4 that we talk about all the time: move, fuel, rest, and connect. I'm curious about the self-realization piece. So the person who, for years, due to work schedule, parenting, whatever, they've just gotten into a flow of whatever, 5-6 hours a night. They don't know. It's just like when you go into a town where there's a weird smell and then you don't notice it after a few weeks. Same thing with sleep. Once you're used to a certain level, you're like, I'm good. I'm fine. I must be one of those people that doesn't need it as much. Are there some cues that folks could look for that might wake them up to, oh, maybe I do need a little more?
Well, I would suggest, so first of all, it's a very small percentage of the population that can really optimally function.
Incredibly small people. I mean, unbelievably small.
So step one, question yourself if you think you're part of that group, right? Because you're probably not.
Probably not. Exactly.
Probably not. And so, there is a tendency to acclimate to the experience of being sleep deprived, and you don't even realize it. But in experimental tests, you can show that your reaction time is slower. That's going to put you at risk for things that's like a car accident, right? So all sorts of ways that the subtle shift or major shift from sleep deprivation could really impact your day-to-day functioning, and you maybe have become unaware. So one is to question whether you're really part of that very small group, which you're probably not. And the second I would say is, rather than looking for cues that you haven't slept well or that's impacting you, run an experiment and try to increase your amount of sleep for, let's say, 2 to 3 weeks. Keep a diary, make sure you're really doing it. Because I know people think they are sometimes, and then they're sleeping a ton one night and then they're restricting their sleep 3 other nights. And that's actually going to make things as bad or worse to have that variability. So do the experiment for 2 or 3 weeks where you say, I'm going to aim for an optimum amount of sleep, 7 to 8 hours. This is going to be my bedtime. This is going to be my wake time. I'm going to do it 7 days a week within reason. The recommendation is no more than a 30-minute difference, bedtime, wake time, and just pay attention and see what you feel like and see if you do notice a shift. I would suggest, if you're someone who drinks before bedtime, even cut that out, really run the full experiment and see if optimizing sleep amount and doing everything you can to optimize sleep quality has an impact.
Yeah. I'll tell you, folks, you're going to feel like a superhero when you do this stuff. I swear to you, there is nothing, at least for me, that has a bigger impact than sleep. All right, last question. We like to call this our catalyst calling. What is your catalyst calling? So as our listeners know, a catalyst is someone who precipitates positive change, but not getting used up in the process. You're doing some exciting work with Remedy and beyond. What do you see as your catalyst calling? The thing that fills you up, doesn't drain you, it's not a martyr situation, while making a positive difference?
I love my scientific collaborations. I'm a huge fan of team science, which means working with other scientists who bring different expertise than I do. The work we're doing right now that I'm most excited about is studying how all the sleep difficulties that we're talking about impact how you remember emotional experiences from your life. And we're looking at that specifically in those young, anxious youth to try to understand how that impacts their development. So, who we are and what we are is really a function of our memories of our life and our experiences. And we know that sleep has a big impact on that. And so we are really getting into the nitty gritty details. We're doing brain imaging and polysomnography and using some experimental memory tests to look at how the interaction of stress and sleep can impact how we remember our emotional selves. And that is super fun work, and it's work I could never do alone. So the catalyst part of that is it feels important to be breaking new ground. It feels novel, and I get to do it with some of my best friends and just have a great time.
That is awesome. Last question wasn't going to ask, but so you and your husband are both sleep researchers. Sounds a little scary to me. Do your kids wear orange glasses around after 6 p.m.? Are there any funny stories from this dual, it's like exponential sleep research versus, multiplier?
Well, the lights on a timer, I think, gives you a little
That was indication. A good one. I like that one.
It definitely rules our environment. We also have spent copious amounts of time setting up, blackout curtains in the windows. And I think it infiltrates our daily life. We have 2 toddlers, a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. And so obviously we're right in that sleep phase, right? Of napping and overnight sleep. And I think, if anything, it's been a very humbling journey. I think any parent of an infant can say that no matter what you know or how much you think you get it, most infants will challenge you at one time or another with what you thought you knew about sleep and how to promote healthy sleep. So I think part of our lesson has just been, yes, following some basic general health practices, and also rolling with things a little bit and recognizing that life is a journey. And I'll bring us full circle on that when we were talking about recommendations for adults. If we're thinking about sleep as one pillar of health, then just like diet and just like exercise, it's going to wax and wane. There are going to be days where it goes better and days where it goes worse. Yeah. And that doesn't mean you just throw your hands up in the air and give up. Totally. You say like, okay, little by little, we're moving in this direction of optimizing sleep for my long-term health. And it doesn't have to look perfect on any given day or week.
Such wise word. I love the way you connected that back. Because yes, if you ate terrible today, you don't throw in the towel. If I was traveling, I didn't get my exercise in. That's okay. That's life, people. And Sleep is the same way. We don't give up after a couple of rough ones. Professor, thank you so much. This is fantastic. So many great tips. Like I said, all of our sleep guests seem to bring some unique perspective, and this definitely did. So thank you so much.
Well, and I hope you'll reach back out to me and let me know how your savoring at bedtime is going.
I will definitely do that.
All right. Very nice to talk with you.
Thanks for tuning into the #1 podcast for health and wellness coaching. We have seen significant growth here in our 5th year, and that is thanks to you. We do almost no advertising. It's all word of mouth. And so the fact that you're sharing this podcast with peers, with friends, and so many others makes the difference, and we really appreciate it. We do have a few spots available for the upcoming MBHWC approved health and wellness coach certification. So if that's on your radar, please reach out if you have questions or you want to discuss how it might fit into your future plans. Results at catalystcoaching360.com is the email, or you can check out details at catalystcoachinginstitute.com. And now it's time to be a catalyst. This is Catalyst Coaching 360's Dr. Brad Cooper. Make it a great rest of your week, and I'll speak with you soon on the next episode of the Catalyst 360 podcast, or maybe over on the YouTube coaching channel.